mirror all the time. Never fails. Yeah, we're live, 12:47. It's technically not the morning, but your morning motivation. So please go out, get something done on your project. I would very much like to. The weather definitely keeps people down. It does. I know it does for me. Winter is not good. I get tired of the rain. I'm tired of the cold. I'm ready for it to be. Would much rather have it be 100 degrees than have it be 30 degrees. And the rain, we need the rain. And in fact, we got to go up to the snow. So it was kind of cool. It snowed in the local mountains here. So we took the boys and the dogs up to the snow and let them got to go run around and play in the snow. So the puppies' first time, they were very excited. They need to get more shots, though, before we can take them out and into the general public. But that'll be cool. I can't wait to take them up to the hills and do all that stuff. But we were able to take them off. They were off by themselves. So Mila was there and the boys were there. We got to go up and drive up in the local mountains. I'm just only, I don't know, 5 or 6 miles away or whatever. And got to go up and make snowballs. And they eventually closed the road because they didn't want a bunch of people going up there. Because there are people that live up there. But, you know, you got to do what you got to do. You got to go to the snow. If it snows like in a local mountain, you definitely got to go up there. So it has been cold. I see one of the worst Hemi intakes in the picture. That is, and that's what we're talking about tonight. Not specifically that intake manifold. That intake manifold probably, well, certainly for Hemis, certainly my least favorite of all of the intake manifolds. It's not bad that if you're running at fairly high RPM on a 5.7, you know, you're running 7,000 or whatever, and it tends to do okay up there. No, it's not a good blower manifold. It's not a, I mean, it kind of lends itself to being a centrifugal manifold because the centrifugal manifold also, or centrifugal supercharger also makes less boost down low, so it has less response. The short runner single plane intake manifold, same kind of thing. It's designed more for high RPM. So they both kind of come into their own at the top of the RPM range. And so if the intake will let you rev farther than, let's say, a dual plane would, or even a truck manifold, or the SRT8 or the Magnum manifold, then, you know, with a centrifugal blower, you could add more power at the top. But is that where you want it? Most of us want it everywhere. So the discussion, excuse me, I seem to have caught a cough or something. But the discussion today is about what happens when we use these intake manifolds. How do things differ? So how do things, a lot of guys, for whatever reason, they seem to think that if we run that manifold fuel injected, that it's different than if we run it carbureted. And while there are some minor differences, basically the intake manifold still operates the same way. So if we take we take that intake manifold and run a carburetor on it, we would keep the injectors in there because they would fill the holes. Otherwise, you'd have very big vacuum leaks. But they would fill the holes. You run it carbureted in a run with the carburetor. We would use the EFI to do the timing, and then we would run it just like you would a carbureted motor, where you change the jetting and stuff to optimize the air fuel, and then run it from whatever RPM to whatever RPM you want to run it on. And the carburetor with that intake manifold produces a specific power curve and a specific amount of peak torque and peak horsepower. We can talk about that. So what happens when we take that carburetor off now and then put a 4150, you know, like a 4-hole throttle body, and quite honestly, even one that flows more. So if we have a, you know, let's say we have a 400 horsepower Hemi and we have a 750 CFM carburetor, and then we have 1,000 CFM 4-hole throttle body. The only way that the 1,000 CFM 4-hole throttle body is going to help things is if was the carburetor itself restrictive. There's always going to be some pressure drop going through the carburetor. That's the nature of the beast. It has to have that. Otherwise, there's no signal to the carburetor. It's not going to draw any fuel. But, you know, how much vacuum is present? What happens typically is the vacuum present at wide open throttle will increase with engine speed. So it'll be much higher at the peak, you know, peak RPM, peak power. It'll be much more there than it will be at 2,000 or 3,000 RPM because it's less of a restriction there. It has enough airflow to, in fact, a lot of times there's no restriction there, and then there's no vacuum there. There is, you know, like we talked about with the carburetor, but there's no power restriction there because the 4150 4-hole throttle body or the carburetor has enough airflow to support the power level. Not a problem. But once you get where the thing is wanting lots of airflow, then it becomes more restrictive. So usually the gains from an undersized throttle body and or carburetor become more prevalent at the top of the RPM range. The other thing that happens that we need to talk about, but the thing is, the important thing is if we run a 4150 and we run a carburetor, let's say that they both had enough airflow and that we optimize the air fuel on both of them, the thing that we would see is the intake manifold still does exactly what the intake manifold does. It doesn't really care where you're supplying fuel, whether it's from the port, whether it's from a carburetor, or even if we put a 4150 4-hole throttle body with injector style thing, you know, the electronic carburetor deal, where all the fuel is blowing into the top of the manifold. Even that, if we could tune that and it worked, then we would, the intake manifold is still going to dictate where this thing wants to make power. So no matter which one of those three that you run, the curves should look very similar. Where you'll see little differences, subtle nuances, is the fact that with the carburetor and with the 4-hole throttle body, if you're able to run that on this single plate intake manifold, both of those would be supplying fuel at the top of the intake manifold. So what you have is more charge cooling. That's not going to affect the way the manifold runs. It's not going to affect its effective operating range and where it wants to make power. It's just typically what we see is when we run a carburetor on there and we have charge cooling from the carburetor, as long as the air, fuel, and timing are pretty close. Timing should be spot on. The carburetor tends to make more power. It does this from charge cooling. We see that with lots of different stuff. I've run the carburetor versus EFI lots of times. And a lot of times back in the day when we'd run it, we completely changed the manifold. Oh, well, we put fuel injection on, the carburetor made more power. Yeah, because you tested a single plane or a dual plane versus a factory 5-liter HO manifold or even a GT40. That's not carburation versus fuel injection in as much as it is two different intake styles. So that's why I picked this. The photo for this, the thumbnail, is that Mopar Performance single plane intake manifold that came on this crate motor. This is from Dulcich's stuff. But that he let me run. And so we run this manifold a lot on stuff. And whenever we would compare this manifold to like the Magnum manifold, the long runner car, factory 5.7 manifold, the Magnum manifold would make more power everywhere except at the very top. This one would make more power at the very top because it's a short runner manifold. It's designed to do that, and it wants to make power up there. And where the other one is kind of crossing over, this one kind of makes more power at the very, very top, wherever that is. 6,000, 6,500, 7,000, wherever the crossover point is, depending on how much camshaft you have in it and all that. But if you're running that manifold and whether you're running with a carburetor or a 4-hole throttle body or 4150 with port injection, the intake manifold is still going to react the way that the intake manifold does. They do that. They also do that under boost. Same thing. If you add boost to this, the boost is just going to change it the amount that the boost changes it. So the easiest way to understand this is if we add a turbo and we add 7 pounds of boost to everything, the curves are going to look exactly the same. As long as we could maintain 7 pounds of boost, all you've done is raised it by that percentage, almost 50%, slightly less because it's 7.35, but a little over 7 pounds. But at 7 pounds, we're almost doubling or almost adding 50% of power. And the curve would maintain exactly the same as long as you could maintain 7 pounds of boost and have it be consistent. Things change when you add, I mentioned a centrifugal supercharger. So if we add a Vortec, for instance, or ProCharger, Torque Storm, because that adds boost at an increasing rate with RPM, it's going to change the shape of the curve. Not because it's done something to the manifold. The manifold still doesn't care. It's still doing what it's doing. It's just that the Vortec has 2 pounds at 3,000 and 7 or 8 pounds at 6,000 or 6,500. And so what happens is the factory curve and the Vortec curve tend to diverge from each other. But again, that has nothing to do with the intake manifold liking boost or liking centrifugal superchargers or liking positive displacement superchargers or any kind of boost therein. They just do what they do. The intake manifold will always do what it does. It won't change. The boost won't change it if the boost is consistent. If the boost is not consistent, then you can change it. But back to our point with the carburetor and fuel injection, that doesn't really matter. And it also doesn't matter. A lot of guys will ask, well, if they ask about the carburetor and the 4150 4-hole throttle body, and then also the 4-hole throttle body deal that has injectors in it, the other thing they'll ask about is, what about an elbow? Doesn't an elbow, if we put the 90-degree elbow and then a 102 millimeter throttle body or whatever on the front of that, and then the other side adapts to the 4150 flange, just bolts right on. Does that change rudder length? No, it does not. The big tube up on top of the plenum doesn't change rudder length because the rudder length ends in the common plenum. The one thing that it does do is add plenum volume. Does that change the power? Does the way that the air enters the elbow and then goes straight down, does it favor, one side or the other because the air stacks up? We see that on not so much on naturally aspirated applications, but you would definitely see that on blow through applications, which we talked about the other day. We're blowing through a carburetor, like feeding it with a turbo or feeding it with a supercharger. We tend to overfeed the back two barrels of the carburetor if we're doing it on a blow through carburetor. And so there may be something there. We we could get into that with individual port, pressure mapping or air fuel. If we got 802s, we could kind of take a look at that. But so if you're running an intake manifold, a carbureted intake manifold, and you're running any of those things on it, the curve is going to be the same. The intake manifold is still going to do what the intake manifold does. If you have any change, it'll be from charge cooling from the carburetor or the throttle body that has actually injectors and is injecting it into the airstream. Down at the port, less time for cooling, less of a gain. Maybe there would be something there. Maybe E85 would be, if we injected E85 at the port versus E85 from the carburetor, I wonder if we'd see less of a difference doing that. I don't remember specifically doing that test. So that would kind of be interesting. But again, we're picking nits there. We're looking for very, very tiny things to just discuss and argue about more than we're really looking for power, I think, in my opinion. The other thing I want to talk about is when you're picking this manifold, this type of manifold, don't pick it because it's a boosted manifold. Pick it just because the manifold is going to make power in the RPM range that where you want it to make power. And this one is going to do a specific thing, and the dual plane is going to do a specific thing, and then these long runner factory styles are going to do a specific thing. But my question is, why don't we seem to be able to have good carbureted manifolds for any of these later model fuel injected versions? So there are some exceptions, and please let me know in the comments what you guys think. What are some good exceptions to that rule? What are some good carbureted manifolds for some of these late model Coyote, Hemi, LS, LT? We have some stuff for the Magnum. On the Magnum, on the previous generation stuff, on the Magnum and the Vortex stuff, there are some decent carbureted deals for those. But I think that those are because the factory manifolds are not nearly as good as they are for the LS, certainly the LS3, the LT, the Coyote, good example of another really good manifold. The later Hemi stuff, especially the dual runner stuff, very, very good. But like the big kegger manifold for the Dodge Magnums, both on the 318 and the 360, in my opinion, if you put a dual plane on there, it's going to be a much better choice. Which we did that. We did that with the guys from Engine Masters to see what would happen. And just like when we do it back in the day with a tune port small block Chevy, you get predictable results. The tune port long runner, real long runner stuff, which still looks very, very, very cool even to this day. Lots of torque, but not a lot of power. So even putting a dual plane on does fairly well down low, but also makes a lot more power, on the big end. So I haven't been around, so let's see what you guys got going on, but we got to have a poll. Okay, so the poll for today: does your motor make peak power higher than 6,500 RPM? Where are my high RPM people? You can hear the rain in the background. Yep. So let's see. Yeah, Barnes, not a good intake manifold. Too bad the Hemi's dead. Yeah, they're going to do the 6-cylinder one now. Yeah, it does have the logo on it, Aaron. That makes it pricey, that's for sure. Best cam for an LY6 for power and higher RPM. I have a 240 SX T56 light car. Take a look at all of the testing that you probably have already done, and you'll probably know that. Happy Monday, Recal. What's up? Squirrels is in the house. Richard, when you do a 2V Big Bang, you should use a Torque Tech manifold and a TVS, not a TVS, because a TVS isn't going to make anywhere near as much power as a turbo is going to. And because we would, we won't see 200 of the horsepower that we would see. I want to see a turbo without a wastegate tested. The only way that you could do that is if you size the turbo so that it's small enough that it doesn't break the motor at high RPM, and then you don't run it at low RPM, because that's where it will be able to break the motor. Because it's able to support an unregulated amount of boost at lower engine speeds. And at some point, depending on the size of the turbo and the NA power output of the motor, it won't be able to support lots of power. Like if you ran an S475 and it could support 1,000 horsepower, the problem is it can support 1,000 horsepower at 3,000 RPM, which, if you do the math, is a lot of torque. And guys have run turbos without wastegates. The old skull and crossbones cap that they put on the wastegate deal. Who was it? One of the drag racers, Christian Ratto, I think, did that. Along the lines of this CARB question, will there be a significant difference in power between a 102 versus a 92 when you have a 3-inch charge pipe from the turbo street application? No, there'll be no difference at all. You don't need a 102. You should match the throttle body to the size of the intake manifold opening, and then not really worry about a big throttle body when you're running boost through it. Sykes. Scrolling. Curious how the factory small block 400 holds up to boost. The semi-cylinders make all sorts of nerve. Yeah, it wouldn't be the one that I would choose. Did they make 400 4-bolt blocks? LSX Hunter, you're revving it all the way to 5,400. My daily peaks around 5,600. Run my 400 small block with a 142 blower and 5 PSI. Nice. Honda Tech, is that a faux Hogan? Is that what the Fogan intake manifold is? I'm peaking at 52 or 5,300, approximately 6,500. Morrow, will you test some ATM? What are ATM carburetors? I ran 13.2 at, what's IFO? Is it, that's not an idle, right? Is that, should that be a WFO? Is the I near the W? No. Power seemed to drop off at 6,200 with my 243-degree cam and the 383. I've revved it past 7,000 a few times, though. Do you have good heads in a single plane on the 383? Wiring the wastegate shut on 6.5 is common performance. with some NA cylinder. JB, so what is your scenario where cylinders run richer or leaner and then it's cured by boost? What's your scenario where that happens? Man, I saw you on TV again. You've been at this a long time. Yep. Samsung TV has a lot of car shows. Been working on an engine with Brule. Yeah. Philosopher, pretty sure he wants you to blow up the engine. But the problem is that if you blow it up at 3,000 RPM, that's not really very much fun. It's not going to make hardly any power. It's going to make a lot of torque, but it's not going to make power doing it that way. I don't think you're going to need much more than 900 flywheel to break the 2V bottom end. Yes, they did make 404 bolts, 72 to 74. Cool. Was watching Weingartner testing the torque link dual plane manifold. Surprised it was how bad it was. Which one is the torque link? Is that the weird twisted one that we have at Westec? Yeah. Yeah, that's not good. That does not make the power that a RPM air gap does. And you'd think that it would. You'd think that it would. You'd think that it's a tunnel ram that's been twisted and therefore should work really well. But that wasn't the case. What do you think about the TIC Performance elbow for single plane multi-port? It's designed to mill down the intake and open up the hole a lot. I don't know that I've seen their particular intake, but the intake manifold still dictates what the power is. Whatever they're doing to the entry in the manifold can change flow into the manifold, but that's usually not what changes the way the manifold works, though. Dual plane air gap on a 383. Yeah, it's probably not going to rev that high. $450 horsepower LS and 68 Chevy truck. Going with, is that Jag ZFI? In the long run, it's not much more than a good carburetor. Picked up an LSA blower this weekend. That'll be fun. Overbuilt. You got all the money in the world and you don't know what to do with it? $4,600 on your 472 Cadillac. Admiral, I'd rather see on a Big Bang thing. I'd rather see a high horsepower number. I don't really care about it'll never get to the top of the RPM range. If you don't have wastegate controlling the boost, which we want to do anyway because we want to control torque, if you just let all the boost come in at 4,000 RPM, it's just going to blow the motor up at 4,000 RPM. Why does the US have 87 octane? Here in Norway, we don't have lower than 91. Nice. But are the measurements different though? Is the calculated number different? Yeah. Do you use an RON number? Saw some engine tuning videos where they ran an O2 sensor in each cylinder. We do that a lot on the engine dyno. Some cylinders run lean while others run rich. And I have a video up of how we use individual cylinder tuning to cure that. And I think we were doing it on a single plane intake manifold. The boost tended to change. It tended to change the air fuel ratio of the intake manifold, but not cure it though. Yeah, TPI is good stuff, especially for low RPM power. Cadillac 472. Smaller Chevy speed. Yeah, Brian Tooley's video about how direct injection mildly supercharges an engine was really interesting. Is there a point where going to a solid roller is necessary to control the intake valve better because of boost? On what application? Guys are running under boost at 8,500 RPM on LS stuff, so I don't know where you want to be for that. Forward, you're getting a Sherman tank. What are those, two-stroke diesels or something in those? We found running up at 8,500 RPM, we had to switch to 5-inch clutches so the engine could spin up and not over rev when shifting. The momentum of the flywheel caused problems. Interesting. TPI and crossfire intakes would be cool on 262s and 267s. And I agree with that, Bob. I think that's probably that's a good application for that. That's why I ran it on that one, the what was it, L99? How's our poll doing? 76% saying no. So most everybody is 24%, or most of them are 6,500 and under. So you're going to try to do a power stroke. What's a Sherman tank weigh? Question answered. Big Block Mopar 440, 78, 75, 6,300 RPM limit. That should make good power there. No budget racing, not to get off subject. We can ask whatever we want here, but have you done anything on Big Block Chevy oval port head stock with 12-to-1 compression with a decent cam? Numbers NA and on display. Well, how much ever nitrous you add is going to add that amount. So if you have put 100 shot on it, it's going to add 100 thereabouts. If you add, 200, you can add 200. You get to a point where you can't add any more, depending on the NA power output of the motor. The 12-to-1 obviously helps if it's a stock oval port head. Those aren't going to support a ton of power, but certainly I'm thinking mid 500s probably. And then whatever you add with the nitrous. Turbo 87 GN. LS3 made 468 at 6,400. Fast intake to the tire. Give me the duration numbers at 50 on the 287, 298 are going to be advertised numbers. The cam that you have in there will do fine with boost. Well, what is it you're adding? Are you adding a turbo or what are you adding? Kenny Detwiller had a great episode on Power and Speed where he talked about valve size versus boost, but that's never going to be relatable. Yeah, Kenny does build stuff that's otherworldly. That's right, Bob. I thought that they did have air radials in them. Only making power on the keyboards. Well, if you got an LS7 in the crate, that's still good. Is there a runner length to RPM range cheat sheet? There is math. It's fairly complex. But you can look at, that's why you can look at the dyno results of all of the stuff that I have up there and go, well, this manifold made peak engine speed at this RPM, which we went over that the other day where we showed the same intake manifold on different displacements, which changes where the thing wants to run a little bit. The camshaft will change that a little bit. Whether it has ported heads or not will change that a little bit, but not a lot. Turbo, what is it? Is it a Turbo 87 GN? Is it for a turbo application? Is it for a centrifugal blower? Have you ever done a test on the wrong valve springs versus the correct valve springs? Yeah, we've cured valve float many times with spring changes. It's a lot because if you get into valve float, you can lose 100 horsepower or more from valve float. It gets unhappy, and you can break stuff too, which is bad. So if you have a turbo, I wouldn't put a bigger camshaft in it. I'd put a smaller camshaft in it. Pick whatever size turbo you want to make whatever power you want, and then put a small camshaft in it, and then away you go. When you did a turbo 440, you mentioned you would do a bunch different if it were yours to make bigger power. Well, you would do the same thing that you do to every other motor. You would put ported heads on it. You'd put a different camshaft in it, much better than the stock camshaft. I don't know who has EFI intake manifolds for those, but you could do a blow through dual plane or single plane carbureted deal. I probably would do aluminum heads on it. And then if you put forge rods and forged pistons in, I didn't get to look at that one to see how far the pistons were down the hole, but I probably would, make it closer to a flat top or some sort of dish that gave me, 9 or 10 to 1 compression. I don't remember what that one was. It was probably was low. And so all of those things would make it a much better motor. Pretty sure my motor makes peak power at 6,500. I'm pretty sure. Which one is that? Your modular deal? I'm sure that should, right? All right, Admiral. How's our poll doing? Still 25%. Or the 6,500 and up crew. The 6.5. Well, I can go from top chat to live chat now that I'm at the bottom. It's live. It's all the way live. I don't think I missed too much, though. I can research this, so no need to answer unless you want to, but how do you know if you're getting valve flow? The way that we see it on the engine dyno is if we have an air hat on the motor, the airflow of the motor will go up with engine speed. Even if you're past the power peak, the airflow still goes up. If you get into valve flow, the airflow will go down. And also we see it on the dyno curve. If you see a nice smooth curve going up and then the thing like has I call it a geometric drop, that's valve flow. And you can hear it too. The motor sounds really unhappy. Richard, I'm finding out not all 918 springs are created equal. Come to find out the springs comp recommended are 50, 60 pounds more open pressure. Are you putting dual springs on there for the that 275 comp cam? Or are you putting other beehives on there? For 393, going to fuel injection. Would you rather see sequential rail injection or a bank fire 4 injector TBI? For me, I would rather run port injection with a 4-hole throttle body that's not distributing fuel. I'm not a fan of the throttle body injection stuff. I am a big fan of port injection. With this combo, would you recommend in the size to get 900 horsepower, keep the car streetable? I did the power tour last year. You should put a VS Racing 7875 or an S475 turbo on it. And then I would put like a Truck Norris cam in it. And you will have all the drivability that you want for power tour and all the performance that you want from however high you turn the boost up. Steve, my F2 Pro Charge 427 small block makes peak power at whatever RPM I set the rev limiter at. That's the thing with centrifugal blowers is that's what we were talking about is if you keep giving it more RPM, it seems to keep making power. Currently set at 7,200. It's probably making peak boost at 7,200, isn't it? Hoping to build a motor that peaks higher, building a 240SX time attack car. A lot of people trying to convince me to go K-Series. That's a good motor. Would love to do something similar to the D-stroke LS. All right. I think you'll be happier with not de-stroking it. I know everybody loves that de-stroke deal, but if you're driving and you're going from one corner to another corner and you can step on the gas all the way because you have less power, that's not a good situation. You want to have to roll into the throttle because you have more power than you can use. That's a much better situation. You guys in both cases, comp spring part number starts, ends in 918. I think it's 26,918 is comp steel. The engine in question started getting erratic around 58 or 5,900. Power fell off at 6,000. That sounds like a broken spring to me. We've run 26,918s to way beyond 7,000 a whole bunch of times. All right, Rab. Mr. Rab. Hi, bye. Still at work. Have a drive-by. Like. Good. I like it. Came by, dropped in, said, what's up? Threw a like up there, which I only see 50% of the people have done. On the dyno, do you calculate airflow ratio from the air hat and flow meter? No. We have O2 sensors. And I consider the meter to be accurate, much more than a calculated number. I remember back in the day, going by spark plugs and brake specific fuel consumption numbers. And I'm like, this is terrible. This is terribly inaccurate. Daniel, destroking is cool. I mean, if I got high RPM destroke motor, everyone's going, ooh, that's really cool. Except the guy next to you that has a 6-liter instead of a destroke one and has lots more average power. Jason, 5.6 liter V8. What cheap turbo would you recommend for 400 500 horsepower? It makes 250, 270 stock. Drift car, 3,700 RPM plus all the time. Maybe an Eaton, Jag, Rover, LSA blower. For a turbo, a GT45 would be for that power range. And I've never tried one of the Jag or Range Rover ones. I did see one at the wrecking yard before, which I thought was interesting, but I've never tried one. We did try the Cadillac one, and then Tom DeMuse has the adapter kit basically for the Ford racing blower or for the GT500 blowers. Richard, that might be a good show, the old method versus what is done now. It only really works on a carbureted application, the way that the Westech has their fuel turbines set up, unfortunately. Java, since I went down on my cam, I'm worried about the valve springs. I have comp 987 springs installed, and the cam requires 986. What is the seat pressure difference between those two? I have both of those right here. And is it a flat tappet cam? Is that what you have for those springs? 986, 987, 121 versus 132. No, you're good. Although one of them has a lot more. They have different install heights, so you need to look at that. Different recommended install heights. And I think if you took your 987s and put them down at 1,750 like they're doing on the 986, you probably would be happier. That's what I would do. I've been stocking that blower in the pick apart. Yeah, I've only ever seen one, but honestly, I'm sure that I've walked right by Range Rovers and stuff that I just have never even looked at. Problem is, I live 35 minutes away from Summit. She says you spend too much time there. It is close. It is convenient. All right, blue collar, go handle your stuff, man. Bear. What's up? Comment, would this be possible? Comment, would this be possible with an all-aluminum LS4 5.3 liter out of an 07 Impala? I'm putting it in an 87 Fiero, so props to you. I'm reading one of the emails in my live stream. Props to him for doing an LS4 and a Fiero. That's very cool. Java, yeah, you can leave the 987s. You're good. Both of those springs are pretty mild, and I'm sure you have a flat tappet cam with those springs. A hydraulic flat tappet, probably. A hydroelectric. I know we don't have a Summit by here. I think the closest one we have is probably in Reno, I'm thinking. Java, you have a hydraulic roller? That's probably not enough spring rate for a hydraulic roller. The puppies are doing good. They're chewing everything up. Causing trouble. Still not sleeping through the night. So that's pretty tough. XR264 HR-10. Yeah, I don't think that's enough spring for that. Does a stage 2 BTR truck cam need spring upgrade? Yes, it does. I can guesstimate horsepower to head flow similar to how guys used to do it back in the day with a turbo motor, or is it moot? 300 CFM at 500 lift was around 600 horsepower. Yeah, because it's and then the turbo motor, you would just take the NA power and then double it at 14.7 pounds. So if you have cylinder heads that flow 300 CFM, let's say you'd have to have a really good motor. But to get 2 horsepower per CFM, let's say those heads will support 600 horsepower. If your NA motor could theoretically make 600 horsepower, it's not that easy. It takes a lot of stuff. At 14.7 pounds, you would now make 1,200 horsepower. Yes, they're just being puppies. They're doing what they do. You do need a Japanese car. I'm a big fan of the JDM stuff. I ran 13.2 and a quarter at import face-off. I had problems with the fuel pressure and intake air temps. Will Center, you made runs and you got data, man. That's good stuff. First motor build, 6-liter LS 243 pack 1219s. Any concerns with the Truck Norris? A Truck Norris cam is a good choice. I don't know about the 1219. I'm not that hip on pack stuff. Trying a new cam, LM7, Fast 102, ported 862s, 231, 239. Yeah, if they did a good job porting the heads, that's enough camshaft and stuff to do that. Throw in some JDM dyno stuff. I have Honda videos up. And I have a Nissan RB25 going up too. Turbo Sentra 13.2. What mile an hour was it? Did you put that up there too? Richard, what about the JDM Model ones with long exhaust, crazy body kits, and wall paint? I appreciate like quality work that's done, like quality craftsmanship and stuff. That's not necessarily what I would do. I do really like one of the things I would like to do on the Z that I have is I'd like to put flares on it. I like the flares on the Z. It's hard to do that to a 240, but I would like a 108. Okay, so that's a good mile an hour. Steven, any suggestions on springs for which one? Oh, I don't. Those springs may work. I just don't know anything about them. I don't know. I'm not hip on the part number stuff for pack. So if somebody else knows what they are, if you could tell me what the spring rates are. Do you know whether a stock ECM in the mid-90s F250 with a 460 would support a turbo? It's not going to recognize positive pressure that I know of. Unless it came from a Lightning, maybe. The other way you could do it is we run boost on the A9Ls on the Mustang computers and stuff, so that one should work. We just rely on the mass error reading. Do you have any retailers you recommend for a bottom end Dart 408 Windsor that doesn't take a year to get? Does Dart have that stuff in stock? Do they not have it? Yeah, I like the little fender lip flares. Not I kind of like and have liked for from years going back when I had my 260. That I think that the guy is from, who was it? One of the Z places in Southern California had like the big box flares, big instant flares, and then you had the big Porsche whale tail on stuff. That looked cool. But the thing is, I thought, well, if you're gonna have that, you have to have the motor to back up all of that like stance. Have you seen any power limits with LS aluminum block strength for high horsepower turbo builds? If you want to make lots of power, get an aluminum 5.3 block. The other ones we don't take, LS1, LS2, LS3. The other ones we don't take over like 1,000 horsepower. But the 5.3 aluminum ones seem to not have a problem. Oh, that wasn't for me. I was going to answer. Any improvements you make to your car that makes you turn around and gaze at it? That's true. The thing is, I tell people all the time, you got to do things that speak to you, whatever that is. I don't care what it is. If you're the guy that likes the multiple seams, I forgot what that's called on the inlet tubes and stuff, dude. That's really nice work. It's not what I would do. I like a smooth tube, but I appreciate the work that went into that. It looks awesome. Right hand drive JDM spec, high spec Toyotas. 180 horsepower RAVs. Those are good. It's what the cam card says. I know, but I'm telling you that I've run that cam a lot. And what heads do you have on there? I wouldn't put 86s or 987s. This is an LS, right? Is this an LS? And then the XR265, or is it something else? What would happen if I cam swap the Ram 1500 with a 392 cam? I think that's a pretty common one. I think guys do that. I've never tried it though. Yeah, the pie cuts are cool, but it's called something though. There's some Japanese name for it, I think. Plans for stock trades this week? I already was trading this morning and not doing very well. Products IK 180s. Is this a small block Chevy or is this an LS? It's all part of the learning process, Tim. I got to get to where I can understand it and do it. Okay, it's a small block Chevy. Okay, that would make more sense then. I still think for hydraulic roller that's not enough spring rate, but definitely go with something that has more spring rate. The 987s would be definitely better than the 986s. Couple more minutes. We're at we're down to 24%. So we'll end our poll there. Cryptocurrency. I have stayed away from that because I just have no idea anything about. I don't know anything about it. Sergeant, what's the difference between what and what? Are you talking about the springs? There's a difference in there's three differences. There's a difference in stall height, there's a difference in seat pressure, and there's a difference in four things: a difference in spring rate and a difference in open pressure. Otherwise, they're the same. What's the best set of heads for a big block? There's lots of really good big block Chevy heads out there. I have videos up on lots of big block Chevy heads if you want to see what what kind of tests we're running. What kind of powers are you thinking that thing is going to make? Are you staying with a 24-degree head, or you're going with an altered valve angle because of the BR20s or the 18-degree stuff? I think that AFR has. There's lots of choices for making lots and lots of power. Swapping a carburetor on an L98 with a stock camshaft, which ones makes more torque, the carb or the tune port? Which one makes more torque where? Which one makes more peak torque? Which one makes more average torque? Which one makes more low speed torque? You got to be specific about what you're asking. Russell, I have a sport touring Triumph that has a detuned Daytona engine. Three-cylinder, they like boost. Yeah, I think every motor does. I want 100 foot-pounds. 100 foot-pounds would be easy. That's going to be very little boost to make that happen. Yeah, Java, I just looked up the seat and open pressure on that. Spun a rod bearing. You have an oiling issue. At what point would it be time to improve my thumper? Well, you're running 120 in the eighth. You're only running 9 pounds. It sounds like the combination is working pretty well. Best year 6-liter LQ9 to build? There isn't one. In fact, if you're building one, you don't even have to have an LQ9 unless you specifically want the flat top piston. An LQ4, an LY6, any of those 6 liters. In fact, it could be argued that if you wanted to do it inexpensively and not put new heads on it, you could take a 6-liter and put rec port heads on it. I'm not sure if I ran. I know I ran a CARB versus EFI test, but I don't remember if it was on a stock tune port or not. I did it twice, and one of them was the 383. I don't remember what the other one was. I thought it was a 350, but I can't swear to that. $300. So that's not it. I thought that was it. Right now I'm looking for the tune port one. L98 TPI versus CARB. Let's see. Final TPI, L98. Take a look at that curve. Final. carb. The carburetor made 386 foot-pounds, and the tune port made 394 foot-pounds. The tune port made more torque up to 4,400, and then the carburetor made more power past that. And made 30 more horsepower. So I hope that helps. Where's the torque peak at? On this one, it was less than 4,000 RPM, 3,900. 39 and 4,000 were the same thing. Peak power happened at 4,700. On a 1 liter bike, 100 foot-pounds of torque is a lot and borderline uncontrollable. Yep. What do you think of the Sniper EFI 650 horsepower kits? Are you talking about the 4-hole throttle body things? I haven't run one of the complete kits. I haven't looked into Pulsar turbos. They have a 79, 75 rated for 1,450 horsepower. That seems like a lot. I don't know. I don't know how they're rating that. Like, if it's a 79 millimeter inducer, I don't think that that's going to be accurate. Oh, shooting for 120 in the eighth. Rebuilt 22 Rs or my living. 6 liter flat top twins versus billet 78, 75 Gen 1s, 862 heads. Twin BS Racing, 862 heads, 226 cam. Lowe's Motorsports. That combination will make peak power way past 5,000 RPM. If you're making peak power at 5,000 RPM, then you don't have enough timing in it, or for some reason you have a really falling boost curve or something. Because a 226 cam and a 6 liter will make peak power way past 5,000 RPM. Have you tested the Elgin Stage 1 cam? I don't think so, but I have tested a cam that's like that. It was somebody else's name, and it works good. It's near a single pattern cam. Maybe cut a hole in the top of the TPI for a carburetor. I tried doing that, and it didn't work. Happy to help on the L98. For a driver not really racing, better to have low RPM. Low RPM torque feels better. It feels snappier and feels more impressive, and then you don't have to rev it up really high to get. That's why American drivers tend to like big motors, like Cadillacs particularly, but all the big blocks and stuff, because then you can, you feel it immediately, and we like that. That's why a lot of the OEMs, when they do turbo motors, that's why they have them come on so early, so it feels like a bigger motor. Surf yours will be the last one. You have a 306 Ford 274 cam Pro Max 185s. It will make a little bit more power with a 750, but I might be tempted to drive around with a 650, because that's still going to be like a 400 horsepower ish motor, or maybe a little less, and a 650 is enough for that power level. And on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys. I'm back, and I'll be back tonight, as always. Later.